Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the third Teleclass in economics. In today's class, we will be discussing mainly on the third topic, which is merger and demerger. As you know that in last week's session, I have already discussed about advantages and disadvantages of different types of mergers. Horizontal, vertical, as well as lateral integration is being discussed with its major motives, right? So in today's class, we will be discussing about the demerger impacts and reasons for demerger. At the same time, we'll be practically doing some of the questions that are related to merger. This is Aisha Miss from Villa International High School. Today's lesson objectives. By the end of today's class, you should be able to explain at least 3 reasons for demerger, and you should be able to explain the impact of demerger. You should also be able to explain two advantages and disadvantages of merger. Mainly these advantages and disadvantages will be the impact on businesses, employees, as well as on consumers. In today's class, the first concept that I'm going to introduce is demerger. We have been talking a lot about merger and advantages and disadvantages of merger, at the same time advantages and disadvantages of being large, right? In today's class, we will be discussing the demerger concept. What is demerger? Demerger occurs when a firm splits itself into 2 separate companies. So when we are thinking about merger, you know that when firms merge together, they become large in size, right? So when they are becoming large in size, what happens is initially they will be able to enjoy the concept of economies of scale. As you can see from this diagram, but when you are looking to this diagram, you can see that as the firm's output is increasing up to point A, you can see that cost is decreasing. But after point A, when the firm is increasing its output, cost is also increasing, right? So you can see that initially there has been experienced in economies of scale, but later it is diseconomies of scale, right? So one of the main reason why firms might be demerging is because when we are thinking about the concept of diseconomies of scale, when firms are large enough, they might be worried about diseconomies of scale, because we know that firms might not be able to manage effectively. As a result, their long run average cost is likely to be higher. So one of the reason is because firms are worried over diseconomies of scale. Another reason could be because when they are large in size, they will be inefficient. They will not be able to manage the activities or monitor the activities which are happening. As a result, it will be difficult for them to achieve economic efficiencies. So in order to reduce inefficiency, they might be demerging. In addition to that, you should also understand that not all mergers are friendly mergers. Sometimes they are forced to take over. So what happens is when firms are large enough, because of experience in diseconomies of scale, some of the rival firms might be interested in taking over the firm because there is a threat that they might be making huge loss, right? So in this case, what happens is when firms are trying to protect themselves from hostile takeover, when they are becoming extremely large, if they are unable to monitor the activities within the firm, what happens is there is a possibility that large other institution might be taking over them. So in order to protect themselves from hostile takeover, they might be demerging. So when they demerge, their size is likely to be smaller and manageable. In addition to that, you also need to understand that when firms are becoming larger, large firms will be able to experience a lot of issues. They might be facing a lot of issues where there can be conflicts between different departments and they will not be able to monitor effectively, right? So in order to prevent from conflicts, they might be demerging. In addition to that, what you need to understand is when large firms' behavior is abusive, when large firms are trying to abuse the market because of the market share they have or maybe the market power they have, always there will be regulatory intervention. So regulators will be observing the behavior of large firms, and in order to prevent them from regulatory interventions, firms might be demerging. So what happens is when firms are demerging, regulators will not be able to identify, or at least regulators will not be observing the behavior of that small firm, so they might be doing demerger to prevent them from regulatory interventions. When we are thinking about the impact of demerger, you should understand that impacts of demerger can be positive impacts, impact of demerger can be negative impacts. Basically, in previous slide, I have explained about the reasons for demerger, right? So when we are thinking about the reasons for demerger, all those reasons that I have previously explained are likely to be the long-term or short-term impact of demerger. Once they demerge, those are the things that they are likely going to achieve. So one of the possible impact of demerger could be they will be able to enjoy economies of scale, or maybe there is a high possibility that after demerger there can be a decrease in long run average cost, because by looking to the diagram you can see that when firms are becoming larger, if there is a possibility that their business is unable to be managed, and because of that reason if they are able to experience diseconomies of scale, by demerging there is a possibility that their average cost is likely to be lower. In addition to that, if you are thinking about the efficiency of the firms, because we know that when firms are large, they are unable to monitor. So one of the impact of demerger could be firms will be becoming more efficient. At least there can be less inefficiency. And in addition to that, they will also be able to experience huge amount of abnormal profit, because there is a possibility that the average cost is likely to be lower. So the lower the cost, the higher the profitability is likely to be. In addition to that, what you need to understand is when firms are demerging, there is a possibility that this demerger will be increasing their funds, because they will be selling part of their business, right? Or they will be splitting part of their business. As a result, because of the sales of their asset, they will be able to get enough funds. So these funds will be, they will be able to use these funds for further development or further investment. In addition to that, as I mentioned, one of the reasons for demerger is to avoid regulatory intervention. So obviously, after demerging, regulators will not be bothered about the behavior of small firms, so they can avoid regulatory interventions. As a result, there can be chances that they might no longer have to pay fines and other charges that they have to pay to the regulators. In addition to that, when firms are able to enjoy abnormal profit, those amount of abnormal profit, they will be able to invest on research and development, and these firms will be able to achieve dynamic efficiency. So these are the possible, mainly focusing about advantages of demerger, but you also need to understand that impact of demerger might not necessarily be always beneficial. Sometimes this demerger might have more negative impact than the intended positive impact. Sometimes the cost of demerger might be much higher. Sometimes they might be losing valuable assets. Sometimes because of the sales of the assets, there is a possibility that their share prices are likely to be lower. So there can be a lot of disadvantages that they might be facing as well. And the next part that I'm going to discuss in today's class is basically in last week's session, as I mentioned previously, we have discussed about merger as well as takeover, and we haven't discussed any of the questions, right? So before we move into the other topic, we will be revising some of the exam type questions that you will be experiencing in future lessons. The sample question that I have taken from merger and takeover is from January 2017 paper. In the first question, it says, with reference to extract 1, explain what type of integration will occur if Shell takes over BG Group. A 4-mark question, but you need to understand that whenever you are trying to answer a 4-mark question in this paper, you need to understand how marks are being allocated, right? Marks will be allocated, 2 marks will be allocated for knowledge level, and the 2 marks will be allocated for the application level. So here the question is, what type of integration will occur if Shell takes over BG Group? So you need to see the case study and try to find the answer, right? So if you are looking to the case study, here it says, Shell, one of the world's largest companies, is planning to take over its UK rival BG Group for around $68 billion. The deal would expand its operation in some of the world's most significant oil and gas regions. Shell's main business activities involve the extractions of oil and gas, refining of fuels, and the distribution and retailing of fuels. BG Group's main activities involve exploration and extraction of oil as well as gas, and employing 5,200 staff in 24 countries. So in this paragraph, when you are looking to this paragraph, you should be able to identify what kind of merger it is. In last week's session, I have discussed about 3 different types of mergers. horizontal, vertical, and lateral, right? So when we are looking to the different types of mergers, as per the case study which is being identified in this question, there are two ways in which you can identify. Knowledge level, as I mentioned, knowledge level is 2 marks and application is 2 marks. So knowledge level is identification of the merger and the definition of the merger. Then application is your justification why it is the kind of merger. In this particular situation, if you are thinking about the context which is being given, you could either identify it as a horizontal merger or vertical merger. Either way, it is fine, because in the case where case study has given information is same stage and same industry is being identified, same industry but different stages are also being identified. So if you are looking to the case study, you could either identify it as a horizontal integration or vertical integration. Based on the identification, you are going to justify why you think it is a horizontal integration or why you think it is a vertical integration. That part you have to do. Then when we are looking to question B says, with reference to extract 1 and extract 2, evaluate the likely benefits to Shell of its proposed takeover of BG Group. This time the question is being asked in what will be the impact on business. Impact on business because of merger. You know that merger or takeover will be giving a lot of advantages to the companies. So here the question says, evaluate the benefits to Shell. So evaluate the benefit means it is obvious that your application and analysis has to be focused on positive side of merger, right? So if it is a 14 marks question, your knowledge, application and analysis, it will be 8 mark. Then your evaluation is 6 marks, right? So in this case, maybe you could identify the definition of takeover, or maybe you could say based on the case study which is being given, you could identify here the value of merger is given as 68 million. So maybe you could identify that also. And if you are looking to the case study further, here the question is asking about the positive impact of merger, right? So in this case, it has mentioned that acquiring BG Group would give Shell access to significant reserves of oil and gas, avoiding the cost of trying to increase its own reserves through exploration. So this is also one advantage that you could say. In addition to that, it has also mentioned that the takeover would also provide Shell with significant ownership rights in an offshore area of Brazil, which has one of the world's largest reserves of oil, as well as large stake in Australian liquefied natural gas. So in this case, it has mentioned that the proposed merger is likely to be giving them increase in market share. At the same time, there is a possibility that their sunk cost is likely to be lower. In addition to that, they have also given that BG Group is one of the world's largest producer and trader of LNG, a form of gas that is supercooled to a liquid state and exported around the world in tankers. So it has mentioned everything, every possible impact has been given, right? So when we are thinking in general about merger or takeover or growth of firms, generally firms will be achieving advantages of merger such as economies of scale, increase in market share, increase in profitability. At the same time, other possible advantages that being large means the abnormal profit can be invested on research and development. So all those advantages can be linked, right? So what you need to do is in this question, since it is a 14 marks question, as I mentioned, knowledge application as well as analysis, it is 8 marks, and then evaluation is 6 marks. Means you could give definition of takeover or maybe possible application about the merger cost that can be identified. What are the possible benefits to the company, right? So what are the benefits to Shell? One of the possible benefit could be significant reduction in sunk costs. What could be the sunk cost? Sunk costs are those costs once it is incurred, it cannot be recovered. Okay, so these are the costs. So what happened is because of this merger, they will be able to reduce sunk costs. So it is also an advantage for them. In addition to that, it has also mentioned that it increases its global presence and at the same time it is increasing its market share. So example is also being given from the case study, oil reserves in Brazil, LNG markets in Australia. So all these are the things that you could bring as part of application, because whenever the question is saying with reference to extract 1 and 2, evaluate. That means you need to bring applications from the case study, right? So other than bringing your own points, you need to have enough points that are from case study. So from case study 1 itself, you can identify a lot of advantages. Then in addition to that, as another advantage, you could identify it enjoys economies of scale, because we all know that large firms' potential advantage is economies of scale. But when you are trying to explain the concept of economies of scale, make sure that you bring relations to the types of internal economies of scale, or what type of economies of scale that could be related, so that your answer will be more accurate. Then when we are looking to the second case study, because you are expected to check on the second case study itself to answer the question, even if the shareholders of Shells and BG groups agree to take over bid, the proposed acquisition needs the approval of relevant anti-monopoly and regulatory authorities around the world. This includes those in the USA, European Union, China, Australia, and Brazil. It is possible that one or more of these authorities may decide to block the bid on the grounds that it would give Shell too much market power. However, Shell has cleared its first anti-monopoly barrier by receiving approval from the USA regulators, the Federal Trade Commission. Other governments' concerns relate to issues such as Shell's environmental policies and its employment practices in certain countries. So this is something that you have to check again before you start your development of the evaluation, especially because these are the points that are more relevant to evaluation. So let's look at the evaluation points that have been given. When you are looking to the evaluation points, one of the evaluation points, because in your analysis part, you have given all advantages to the company. In your evaluation, you can talk about the possible disadvantages, right? So here you can talk about initial cost of takeover. Initial cost, as it is been mentioned, it is $68 billion. So in this case, maybe this cost might be too high for the company, and it might be considered as an evaluation point. In addition to that, we all know that being large does not necessarily mean that they will be always enjoying economies of scale. There is a possibility that they might be able to experience diseconomies of scale because they are going to expand in different areas, right? So you can talk about possible diseconomies of scale. Maybe if you are trying to explain your answer, you could even use the diagram that is being shown for the economies of scale. So you could refer to that and explain your answer. Then here you can see that Shell grows larger than MES. MES means minimum efficient scale, right? So different systems in place, employees dissatisfactions, those things you can identify. In addition to that, in the case study itself, it has mentioned that takeover bid process is lengthy and expensive. So those things will be needing a lot of approvals. So these things will be taking a lot of cost. At the same time, it will be time consuming. So those concepts you can identify. In addition to that, there is high chances of increase in paperwork as well as bureaucracy, which can be an additional burden for the company. In addition to that, it has also mentioned that the bid may be blocked by one or more competition authorities. So we know that because of merger or takeover, regulatory bodies will be always observing the behavior. So maybe if this bid is not being approved, then in that case, it might not necessarily be successful, or the advantages that initially we have mentioned might not necessarily be effective, right? So these are certain points that you can include in your answer when you are trying to answer the question which is being given on the possible impact, positive side of merger, because the question says evaluate the benefits to Shell of its proposed merger. So in your analysis, it is all advantages, and in your evaluation, it's all disadvantages. Now let's look at the question C. This is actually a question that I want you to try, but before I give it for you, I will be briefly explaining how to develop your answer. Here in this question C, it says, with reference to extract 1 and extract 2 and your own knowledge, discuss the likely impact of the takeover of BG Group by Shell on employees and consumers. Previously, we have discussed impact on the company now, or the business. Now we are going to discuss what will be the impact on employees as well as consumers. Here the question is talking about possible impact. Impact can be positive, impact can also be negative. So you could start with positive impact on both sides, or you could sometimes include negative impact. It will be easier if you can start with the positive impact, right? So already you have gone through extract 1 as well as extract 2. So I will not be revising the extract as such, but what I will do is I will be briefly identifying some of the points that you could identify. Here the question is asking you to focus mainly on impact on employees as well as impact on consumers, right? So maybe one paragraph you can have for employees, another paragraph you can have on your consumers. When you are trying to develop your answer again for a 14 marks question, you need to understand that how marks are being allocated. Knowledge, application, as well as analysis, it is 8 marks, and then evaluation, it is 6 marks. So if you are explaining a very detailed 2 points, it is fine. If brief, you can go for 3 points, okay? Then when you are trying to think about let's look at the positive side on employees. Here we have been talking about a proposed takeover, and this proposed takeover has been giving economies of scale or greater market share or the profitability to the large companies, right? So because of these advantages, what could be the likely impact on employees as well as consumers? Let's take from employees. When we are thinking about employees, if their business is experiencing normal profit, or maybe if the business is successful because of their expansion or because of this takeover, one of the likely impact that employees will be experiencing is there's a high possibility that they will be able to get better wage, right? So they might be given enough pay. As a result, their job satisfaction will be increasing. In addition to that, if businesses are successfully expanding, there is also a possibility that business will be spending a lot of money on employees development, like training opportunities might be given, or other health sector health opportunities might be provided, insurance facilities might be provided. So these are certain things that they might be doing for the betterment of employees. What could be the impact, positive impact on consumers? If you are thinking about the positive impact on consumers, consumers are likely to be benefited because if firms are able to experience economies of scale, that decrease in average cost is likely to be going to pass the lower prices on the consumer. So finally, they will be able to get cheaper products. So as a result of cheaper products, their consumer surplus is likely to be higher. In addition to that, if you are thinking about the impact on consumers, you know that when businesses are experiencing abnormal profit because of their expansion, they will be investing that on research and development, and finally consumers would be able to get access to quality products. So that is also one of the advantages to the consumer. But if you are thinking about the disadvantages to the employees could be, maybe if you are thinking about a horizontal merger, one of the possible disadvantage of horizontal merger, or because of this takeover, it could be labor redundancy because of rationalization, or because of the takeover. Some of the laborers might be losing their jobs. So in that case, they might not necessarily be better off because of the takeover. In addition to that, if you are thinking about the impact on consumers, you know that large businesses are getting the abuse in monopoly power because of the expansion. So if they are getting abuse in monopoly power, they might not necessarily be selling goods to consumers at cheaper price because they have price making power. They are price makers, right? So in that case, they might be charging high prices from consumers, or sometimes quality of goods that they pass on consumers might not necessarily be improving. So these are certain advantages and disadvantages that you could identify because of merger. So that's all that I will be discussing in today's class. In next week's class, what I will do is I will be discussing about certain cost related things in relation to profit maximization, sales maximization, as well as revenue maximization. Mainly objectives of firms will be covered. Wassalamu alaikum.